The fire was not supposed to reach the field. It had raged for 3 days, devouring acres of dry brush outside the sleepy Iowa town of Wren Hollow, and the fire department had drawn a hard line along the old school fence. But fate, as it always does in the shadow of unsolved disappearances, ignored boundaries. When the smoke finally cleared on the morning of October 12, 2012, and crews moved in to survey the blackened rubble, they found something the fire had not destroyed, something buried just beneath the scorched earth. 2 small bracelets, one braided with turquoise thread, the other split and burned at the clasp. Both belonged to Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains, 17-year-old best friends who vanished one gray morning in 2004, leaving behind backpacks, half-packed lunches, and questions that would break families apart. They had walked into Wren Hollow High School and never walked out, until the fire. Wren Hollow had always been a town edged by silence, the kind of place where secrets sink deep into the soil and stay buried for generations. In 2004, that silence was split open by a void no one could explain. 2 teenage girls, inseparable since kindergarten, simply gone without trace or warning. Sarah with her quicksilver laugh, and Emily with the gentle, inward stillness that made her seem like she was always listening to something no one else could hear. They weren't the kind of kids to skip school or stir trouble. The morning they went missing, it rained a soft, steady drizzle that soaked the pavement and blurred the trails they might have left. Teachers marked them absent. Their parents assumed illness. It wasn't until 6th period that panic took root. By then, their lockers sat untouched, and their phones, charged and silent, buzzed in the lost and found bin like ticking clocks no one noticed in time. The initial search unfolded like a waking nightmare. Bloodhounds combed the school grounds, their noses brushing puddles and damp football turf. Helicopters swept the surrounding woods, shielding flashlights against the gray veil of dusk. Volunteers, neighbors, even classmates formed lines and walked arm in arm through nearby fields. But there was no sign of the girls, not a shoe print, not a cry, not even the familiar creak of Sarah's bike chain. Investigators focused on the school surveillance system, only to find the tape from that morning mysteriously corrupted, a critical 10-minute span eaten by static. The police built theories around stranger abduction, but something felt off even then, festering quietly beneath the surface of the narrative. Rumors tangled with facts. A janitor claimed he saw Emily talking with someone in a faculty parking lot, someone wearing a red windbreaker, but no such person was ever identified, and the footage that might have confirmed his story was part of the glitch. A single question kept echoing through the halls of Wren Hollow High. How did 2 girls disappear in broad daylight inside a building full of people and cameras and leave not even a shadow behind? In the weeks that followed, the town unraveled. Candlelight vigils dotted the church lawn, each flickering flame a prayer that seemed to sputter out into cold October winds. Sarah's mother, Marla Whitaker, stopped speaking entirely for 3 days. It wasn't grief, at least not fully. It was the terrifying vacuum of the unknown, the idea that somewhere her daughter might still be alive, just beyond reach, crying out where no one could hear. Emily's father, Robert Rains, grew obsessive, constructing timelines on the walls of his garage, pins, and red thread tracing theories that looped back into themselves like the craving of a desperate mind. The media swarmed, then soured. Headlines turned from "2 girls gone" to "Town of Secrets." And while children were walked to school under tight-knuckled grips, and doors were locked in daylight, a slow suspicion began to fester, not of outsiders, but within. Whispers said perhaps the answers weren't far away. Perhaps they never left the school at all. Rumors turned inward like smoke curling under doors. Teachers once admired became subjects of casual accusation. Students recalled the way Mr. Callahan, the chemistry teacher, always locked his lab between periods, or how Mrs. Denton, the reserved literature instructor, once cried quietly through a fire drill. Hallway chatter sharpened into suspicion. A class photo resurfaced taken just days before the girls vanished. In it, Sarah smiles slightly off camera, her arm linked with Emily's, who stares directly ahead, eyes unreadable. Tucked in the corner of the frame is something odd, unnoticed before. A red blur that could have been a backpack, or a jacket sleeve, or nothing. But in Wren Hollow in the fall of 2004, nothing was never just nothing. Fear fed on ambiguity. And inside the high school's brick walls, layered with decades of adolescent laughter and unspoken pain, a darker question twisted itself tighter. What if the people meant to protect the girls were the ones who knew exactly where they'd gone? 8 months after the girls went missing, the police declared the case cold. Boxes of interviews, soil samples, and scribbled witness statements were sealed tight and shelved in the back of a courthouse archive, collecting dust beside other unclaimed ghosts. But grief does not respect bureaucracy. For the Whitaker and Raines families, hope hardened into ritual. Marla would visit the school every Sunday at dawn, standing just beyond the fence with a thermos of black coffee, staring at the second-story windows as though Sarah might lean out, laughing, hair tangled in the wind. Robert kept a log of every anonymous tip he received, each one meticulously dated, cross-referenced, and pinned to a corkboard that grew heavier with secrets and lighter with credibility. Most were hoaxes, cruel or deluded, but one, sent in the winter of 2006, stood out. It came as a single sheet of lined notebook paper, stained with what looked like ink or maybe blood. The message was simple. The red windbreaker. You buried the rest of it. Check the boiler room drain. It was unsigned and ignored. Officials dismissed it as false lead number 87. But 8 years later, standing in the scorched remains of a cornfield, investigators would remember that note, the red windbreaker, and realize what it had really meant all along. In the aftermath of the fire, state investigators descended on Wren Hollow like vultures circling long-dead betrayal. Excavation crews began sifting through the ash and dirt, not for evidence of arson, but for truth, old, blackened, stubborn truth. Near the east fence, less than 70 feet from the rusted remains of the school gym, they uncovered more than bracelets. Fragments of tooth enamel. A charred piece of fabric, still holding a zippered pocket. And then, buried deep beneath layers of compacted soil, only loosened by fire, the outline of a rusted metal hatch. Its hinges were fused, its handle warped by age and heat, but it bore the faint stamp of the school district's maintenance wing. No plans existed for anything below that field. No records, no reason. And yet, when the team finally forced the door open, a howling gust of cold air poured out like a scream held in for almost a decade. What lay beneath had been hidden with intention, with calculation. And it would change everything they thought they knew about that rainy October morning in 2004. The hatch creaked open like the throat of the earth itself, exhaling secrets mothballed by time. What lay below was not a basement or utility tunnel, as one might expect, but a chamber lined with insulation and soundproof padding. Handheld flashlights pierced the gloom, revealing rust-stained walls and decades-old graffiti, scrawled initials, tally marks, and drawings, done in what some suspected to be charcoal, others feared was blood. In the far corner, a repurposed filing cabinet lay tipped over, its drawers warped shut by moisture and heat. Near it, impossibly, was a foam mattress half consumed by mold, and beside that, a weather-softened notebook clutched within a skeletal hand. Silence fell. The notebook was carefully lifted, its cover bearing 2 names in fading ink: Sarah Whitaker, Emily Raines. When investigators opened it, they found no entries past October 9th, 2004. But within those pages, in a voice trembling across time, the girls had written of whispered footsteps above them, fading light, and a promise to each other that no matter what happened, they would never be forgotten. News of the subterranean chamber spread like wildfire, consuming the town's last illusions of safety. The school was immediately shut down, declared a potential crime scene, and surrounded by yellow tape that flapped in the wind like dying petals. Forensic experts descended, piece by piece reconstructing what had happened beneath Wren Hollow High. The evidence, though degraded, was damning. Environmental analysis showed that the ventilation system from the boiler room once connected directly to the hidden chamber, a cruel detail that suggested whoever designed the space had intended for it to be sustained, at least temporarily. DNA samples confirmed what everyone feared, yet already knew both Sarah and Emily had died down there. But how they had ended up in that room, who had put them there, and why, remained tangled in shadows. The girls had scrawled names in their notebooks, some familiar, others obscured under smudges of time, but one entry stood out, written again and again in increasingly frantic script: "He comes when it rains." Rain became more than weather in Wren Hollow, it became an omen. Every storm that passed through the town in the years after 2004 now carried echoes of footsteps underground, of unseen eyes watching through the grate of the boiler room vent. Investigators pored over every name in the notebook, cross-checking faculty rosters, substitute teacher logs, even janitorial schedules from nearly a decade earlier. One name, Curtis Llewellyn, caught particular interest. He was a temporary maintenance worker, allocated to the school during the fall of 2003, his employment ending abruptly just weeks before Sarah and Emily vanished. Records showed he was hired through a third-party contractor, which had since dissolved, and that he had no listed forwarding address. But what raised alarms wasn't his disappearance from payroll. It was his connection to the school's renovation permit filed quietly that same year, detailing vague, substructural upgrades that city inspectors never signed off on. The hatch, investigators now believed, had been installed then, not by error, but by design. And possibly not by one man alone. Curtis Llewellyn's name became a whisper along the edge of every theory, a shadow cast backward through time. Investigators tracked what little they could: an old driver's license photo, grainy and unsmiling, his eyes just misaligned enough to feel wrong. Former administrators remembered him only vaguely, describing a quiet man, efficient and forgettable. But one recalled that he often worked late, long after custodial shifts had ended, and favored the basement level for his midnight repairs. His personnel file, thinned by time and fire damage, revealed a single disturbing footnote: unprofessional conduct, reported by student. Reassigned pending review. No follow-up, no documentation of who the student was. One theory gained weight. The idea that Llewellyn had preyed on vulnerability, used the noise of renovation as camouflage, and constructed the chamber not as hiding place, but as prison. But if that were all, if this was solely the work of a single, vanishing man, then why? Why were more names from the girl's notebook beginning to match donors, board members, faculty? And why did one final page, barely legible, seem to implicate someone still walking Wren Hollow's streets? The last page of the notebook felt like a confession scribed in the dark, each line more hesitant, more broken than the last. The handwriting faltered, but one name was unmistakable, circled 6 times and underlined to the point of paper tear: Garrett Lindsley. He wasn't staff. He wasn't a teacher or janitor or board member. He was a student, a senior in 2004, the older cousin of Emily Rains, though the family rarely spoke of him. He had dropped out mid-year, citing emotional health, and had apparently left Wren Hollow soon after, but his file revealed something chilling. He had been caught trespassing inside the school, weeks before the renovation permit was filed. Witnesses said he'd lingered near the boiler room, mumbling to himself. The guidance counselor at the time noted deep paranoia, an obsessive streak, and attachment behaviors toward a younger, unnamed student. It had all been buried beneath academic bureaucracy. Now it surged forward like a tide of rot, breaking its dam. And just 2 days after his name was made public in an unsealed court affidavit, Garrett Lindsley returned to Wren Hollow unannounced, unarmed, and with something in his possession he refused to hand over to anyone except the parents of Sarah and Emily. He arrived just after dusk, stepping from a battered sedan that coughed smoke into the dying amber light. His face was thinner, hollowed by time or guilt, but unmistakable those sunken eyes, those trembling hands. Garrett Lindsley walked the length of the Whitaker driveway without speaking, holding a single item wrapped in wax paper and twine. Marla and Robert stood side by side, not as grieving strangers but as mirrored parents, statues forged by tragedy. Garrett said only, "I never meant for it to happen. and placed the package gently on the porch rail. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled in Sarah's handwriting, warped but intact. Investigators would later extract snippets of audio: Sarah's voice reciting days of the week, Emily whispering hymns, and a male voice, older than theirs, speaking softly. "Do you want me to turn off the light?" That night, Garrett vanished again, but what he left behind would ignite the final descent into the secret heart of Wren Hollow, a heart built on silence, stained by complicity, and held together by the fragile, unbroken bond of two girls who had promised never to be forgotten. 2 weeks after the tape surfaced, everything changed. Audio forensics uncovered something no one expected. A second male voice, faint beneath the other, as if picked up by accident, or hidden behind a wall. The words were unclear, but the tone carried authority. Investigators enhanced the recording frame by frame, word by tortured word, until a whispered phrase emerged: "We still have time." That single chilling line reframed everything. This was never just about one man's cruelty. It was about permission, about cover. The investigation ballooned beyond Wren Hollow, pulling in former school board members, educators with ties to funding decisions, contractors quietly paid in cash. A map began to form, fragile and horrifying, a network of silences, where children who needed help fell between the cracks with eerie precision. But it wasn't until a handwritten ledger was discovered inside an old decommissioned records room at the City Hall sheets, marked only with initials, dates, and amounts, that the true implication struck. Sarah and Emily weren't the first. They were simply the last. And the fire, unthinking and wild, had uncovered more than the remnants of 2 broken lives. It had revealed the carefully erased history of a town built to forget. The ledger's discovery triggered a seismic shift in the town's narrative, a final, agonizing rupture in the thin veneer of innocence that Wren Hollow had maintained for decades. The initials that filled each line were cross-checked, with missing persons reports spanning back to the late 1980s. A pattern emerged, and with it, a horrifying realization. At least 5 other children had vanished under similar circumstances, their cases closed quietly or misfiled entirely. Emily and Sarah weren't unfortunate anomalies. They were the end of a terrible lineage. Grand juries were summoned, subpoenas issued in bulk. Retired officials found themselves unearthing old emails, contracts, black binders once assumed destroyed. In the eye of the storm stood that scorched field, hauntingly quiet again, but now sacred ground. A memorial rose there by spring, 2 figures carved from charred wood, hands clasped. Beneath it, a plaque etched with a promise: "We remember because they were never meant to be forgotten." But even justice, once awakened, does not move in straight lines. Buried truth seams itself into the fabric of a place, into the people who survived on rumors and resignation. As grand juries deliberated and headlines flickered with names once trusted now fallen in disgrace, the emotional center of Wren Hollow shifted not to the district attorney's office or the forensics lab, but to a modest living room where 2 mothers sat in near silence, the space between them filled not by grief, but by a quiet, shared resilience. The town waited for trials, for convictions, for explanations that might finally make sense of 8 years of silence, followed by one terrible scream from beneath the feet of their children. But for Marla and Robert, the question was no longer who would pay, or even how it happened. Their question curled inward, private and sacred. What would the girls have become? What dreams filled the space beyond October 9, 2004? And can memory ever be enough in place of a life lived? In Wren Hollow today, the rain still comes heavy in autumn, and every drop carries an echo. Of laughter, of cries, of footsteps lost beneath 12 feet of earth, of Sarah and Emily, who vanished together, and who were found together, not only by fire, but by a truth that at last refused to stay buried. Yet even as names were named and truths exhumed, some wounds refused to close. The town held public forums, reconciliation meetings, candlelit ceremonies where people choked through apologies they had no words for and asked questions no one could ever fully answer. But beneath the gestures was something more enduring and awakening. Survivors, long silenced by guilt or ignorance, came forward in hushed, halting voices. A former school counselor spoke of warnings ignored. A substitute janitor uncovered a forgotten logbook detailing appointments never logged. The community began to turn itself inside out, searching for rot, for complicity, for the small betrayals that paved the way to something monstrous. Wren Hollow, once a town etched in habit and hush, now flickered uncertainly between mourning and reckoning, and for every tear dropped in memory of Sarah and Emily, there came a vow, quietly spoken, often broken, but always honest. Never again. Their story, once hidden, now lived in the spaces between streetlights and school bells, a litany of warning and remembrance in equal measure. But for all it revealed, the fire had not burned away the most unnerving truth, that even in towns like Wren Hollow, with their neat lawns and polite nods, darkness can thrive in silence, cloaked not in shadow, but in familiarity. Years passed, and the school was razed, the field replanted. A new community center rose in its place, built on the promise of transparency and healing. But older residents couldn't unsee what had been found beneath their feet. People moved away, others moved in, unaware of the soil's whispers. And though justice had unspooled across courtrooms and headlines faded into archives, the true reckoning remained deeply personal. In forgotten drawers, families kept Sarah and Emily's letters. On old cassette players, their voices played in quiet rooms. And when the rain came again, as it always did, soft and persistent, those who remembered still paused, listening not just for a return, but for an answer. Some said the girls were watching now, wherever they were. Others believed their story had lit a match, in a world still too full of locked doors and unanswered cries. But one truth became unshakable. They had vanished together. They had been lost together. And they had been found together. And in that terrible, beautiful bond, they had ensured one thing most of all: they would never, ever be forgotten. Still, questions endured. Why had no one heard the girls' cries beneath that floor? How had years of renovations and janitorial rounds missed the echo of their pain? Some said the chamber had been a spiritual dead zone, a place where sound folded inward. Others believed the silence was human, not structural, willed and chosen. Survivors, now grown, pieced together fragmented memories like shattered stained glass. An odd hum near the boiler room, a locked door that had no key, the unsettling sense that someone had been watching, even while unseen. The town historian, a reserved man named Elias Hartman, unearthed a decades-old draft of the school's original blueprints. It was unsigned, marked up in fevered red ink, and stapled to a permit request, long denied. There it was, the hatch, labeled only as Access Room 9. But when Elias traced that red ink through old town hall archives, he found matching annotations across multiple buildings, stretching beyond Wren Hollow. Rumors stirred again. Was this chamber an isolated horror, or part of something larger, more systemic? A pattern not of one predator, but of infrastructure built knowingly, quietly, and always off the books. The truth, even now, might remain buried, stitched into the foundations of places where no one ever thinks to look. Access Room 9 became a symbol not just of what was found, but of what was engineered to remain hidden. Investigators expanded their reach, scouring state records, architectural documents, and school district contracts from neighboring counties. A chilling commonality surfaced: renovation, permits filed with ambiguous language, foundations poured thicker than code required, rooms listed on drafts that appeared in no final plans. Across 3 other towns, hatches were discovered. 2 led nowhere, hollow dead ends. One opened to a similar insulated chamber, long emptied. The implications deepened the sorrow in Wren Hollow, but they also fortified a collective instinct to uncover, to remember, to protect. Sarah and Emily's legacy was no longer just about justice, but prevention. Trauma had etched its story across the landscape, but so had courage. In classrooms now repurposed and rebuilt, paintings of 2 girls hang a tribute to light lost and light reclaimed. And in each child's footsteps, echoing through fresh hallways. There is a vow forged not in fear, but in defiance. The past was dark, but the future would not close its eyes. And still, in the quiet corners of the world, rooms like Access Room 9 may sleep beneath layers of dust and denial, waiting for the kind of accident, a storm, a fire, a stray question that uncovers what evil once thought safe forever. Wren Hollow became not a cautionary tale, but a promise etched in stone and memory. That silence is never harmless, and that forgetting is a choice with blood on its hands. The names Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains are now woven into advocacy campaigns, legal reforms, safety standards, threads of vigilance stitched into systems where cracks once swallowed children whole. But it is not in paper or protocol that they endure most deeply. It is in the trembling moment when night falls and a mother reaches again for a door that will never open. In the thunderclap that pulls a town's breath tight against its teeth, and in the resilient whisper of two young voices echoing still, clear and unbroken, reminding a world too used to looking away that the hidden will one day rise, and the forgotten will one day speak. Even now, decades later, the rain hasn't lost its voice. It still taps against the windows of Wren Hollow like it's searching for something, or someone. The town carries on, reshaped, but never fully healed. A new generation grows up playing atop quiet hills and learning in sunlit classrooms, unaware perhaps of the cost that cleared the path beneath their feet. But those who remember carry the weight gently and fiercely, a kind of watchfulness passed down in glances and guarded silences. Sarah and Emily's story is told not as caution, but as origin, the beginning of a reckoning written in ash and echo. Their names are engraved not just in bronze, but in the way this place breathes now, with vigilance, with sorrow, with hope sharpened by tragedy. And whenever storm clouds gather over Iowa and the horizon bruises dark with memory, the people of Wren Hollow do one simple thing. They listen, because some truths sleep under soil, and some, no matter how deep they are buried, are waiting to be heard again. But the story of Wren Hollow does not end in whispers or courtrooms, or even the slow rebuild of its quiet streets. It continues each time a child raises their hand to speak hard truths, each time a door long shut is opened with trembling fingers. It lives in the soft clatter of bracelets on young wrists, in the names etched carefully into notebooks, and in the vow that what was hidden will not be hidden again. Because though Sarah and Emily walked into Wren Hollow High School and never walked out, their voices walked on even through silence, through shadow, through fire. What they endured will shape the light ahead, not as a scar but as a guide. And when the rain comes again, as it always does, people won't just listen, they'll remember, not to be afraid, but to see. And that is why, when the clouds draw close and the air thickens with the promise of rain, Wren Hollow does not tremble, it reflects. The town now understands that silence can shelter monsters just as easily as it can hold sacred things. That memory, when neglected, becomes absence. But when tended, it becomes legacy. For Sarah and Emily, that legacy now breathes in the policies rewritten, the teachers retrained, the walls rebuilt with windows that refuse to shut out truth. Their disappearance once marked an end, but what followed became a beginning. Not just for justice or reform, but for a quiet revolution born in grief and grown in courage. And so, beneath the soft percussion of fall rain and within the hush of classrooms forever changed, the story endures not in what was lost, but in what was made known. And that, above all, is how darkness is defeated, not by erasing the past, but by bearing it forward, and daring with open eyes never to let it happen again. As the memory of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains weaves itself into the moral fabric of Wren Hollow, their story emits a strange kind of light, a quiet blaze that keeps watch. There is no final chapter, no closing scene that can hold every echo of what was lost, but there is a rhythm now, a way the town listens differently, loves differently. Where once stood apathy, now stands ache. Not mourning alone, but an awareness refined by fire and rain. The girls left behind no farewell, no curtain drawn across the stage, What they left instead was a key hidden in plain sight, forged in silence, unlocked by grief, and with it, the refusal to ever again walk blind into the comfort of forgetfulness. So Wren Hollow stands, altered and alert, not free from its dark past, but unwilling to ever let it disappear again. And in the hush before every new storm, that truth hums like wind before thunder, that remembering is not enough, but it is where healing begins. And perhaps, in the end, that is the truest form of justice, the kind that does not erase the pain or promise closure where there is none, but instead transforms what was once unbearable into something unignorable. For every parent who kisses a child goodbye at the school gates, for every teacher who now pauses to see beyond silence, Sarah and Emily live on. In vigilance, in empathy, in relentless truth. Their story drew from darkness, a light that refuses to dim. And though the final pages of their lives were written underground, behind walls meant to hide, the world above now reads them aloud, not as cautionary tales, not as statistics, but as daughters, friends, voices that dared to stay loud even in silence. And so, when the next storm rolls over the fields of Wren Hollow, when the clouds darken and the wind rises, one town will not shrink. It will remember. It will listen. And it will say, again and again, not this time. Not anymore. And yet, even as stories fade and years roll forward, some echoes find their way through time's veil. In 2042, a child playing near the edge of a neighboring town's elementary playground uncovered something strange beneath a rusted drainage grate. A square of faded cloth, red and brittle with age. Authorities dismissed it at first, deeming it trash caught in the crawlspace of generations. But a custodian, once part of the crew that rebuilt Wren Hollow's gymnasium 2 decades earlier, recognized the texture. He made a call. Investigators returned, not with sirens or lights, but with quiet shovels and hesitant breath. Beneath the school's foundation, beneath chalk lines and plastic slides, they found what they were sure would never resurface again. Not a body, not a chamber, but the layout, the architectural fingerprint of Access Room 9. Again. And in that moment, it became unshakably clear. This was never just about Wren Hollow. The soil of silence stretches far, but so, too, does the will to uncover. And so it begins again, not as nightmare, but as mandate. Investigators comb the site of the new discovery, tracing the same cryptic contours once thought unique to Wren Hollow. More names surfaced, old permits unfiled, documents half-shredded and misdated patterns mapped quietly across counties, like roots of an ancient tree finally cracking through concrete. A federal task force formed, fueled not by panic, but by a hardened resolve born in the ashes of 2 bracelets once plucked from a burned field. Emily and Sarah had never meant to ignite a movement, but they had. What was exposed in that hidden room beneath a school in Iowa bore fruit far beyond its modest town limits. Now, communities that once closed their eyes began opening doors. Cities revisited their blueprints. Students, grown now, returned to share stories not of fear, but of resistance. In that way, Sarah and Emily did what silence tried to prevent. They created change. And as the winds shifted through 1,000 playgrounds and the rain fell soft once more, a generation arose not with fear in their chests, but fire in their veins, fire to uncover, fire to protect, fire to remember. And when the final report was filed, when the last microphone was unplugged and the courtrooms grew quiet, when the headlines dimmed and investigators moved on to other cases, Wren Hollow did not forget. It became a place with edges, sharper now, more watchful. Its children grew up, not under the illusion of innocence, but under the clarity of truth. They knew the stories. They carried them like heirlooms, strange, sacred things. And each autumn, as the skies grew heavy and the rain came steady, new hands braided ribbons of turquoise and crimson into the fences of whatever school bore the next echo. Not out of fear, but out of remembrance, because the soil still murmurs, and the wind still knows where it passed through secret doors. But now, so do they. And that, perhaps, is all the fire ever wanted to illuminate what had been hidden, so that no child, no voice, no life would ever vanish unmourned again. Some stories are warnings, others are prayers. But the tale of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains lives on as both. A haunting, a hymn, etched not just into the dirt of Wren Hollow, but into the circuitry of every policy, the blueprints of every school, the pulse of every parent who watches their child disappear into a building each morning and prays that they, unlike two girls in 2004, will come back out again. It is not over. It may never be, because the systems that bred silence evolve in darkness, and those who guard against them must stay forever in the light. But something changed the day that fire reached farther than it should have. Something unburned, something unburyable. In the scorched soil of a forgotten Iowa town, love endured. Not the quiet, passive kind, but the restless, roaring kind. The kind that said, "We will dig until we know. We will remember until remembrance becomes armor. And we will speak not only for Sarah and Emily, but for every voice still waiting to be heard." That is the legacy. That is the vow. That is the fire that never dies. And so, even today, in places far removed from Wren Hollow, where streets hum with different names and the rain touches unfamiliar rooftops, the same quiet echoes are beginning to stir. Architects glance twice at outdated plans. Parents linger longer at pickup lines. Teachers lock eyes with students and see more than test scores. They see potential silences needing to be broken. Sarah and Emily's legacy now pulses beneath the surface of everyday life, like a second heartbeat, quiet but persistent. Their story is carried not just in memory, but in action, in a new law passed quietly in a Senate chamber, in a school inspector's pause before signing off, in the soft refusal of a janitor somewhere to ignore a door that shouldn't be there. They are no longer missing. They are present. Everywhere hidden things are brought into light. Everywhere, a voice long silenced finds the courage to speak. The fire has spread not of destruction, but of reckoning, and it burns still, not with rage, but with purpose, a purpose that says, "We will never let the buried stay lost again." Somewhere beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the clang of hallway lockers, somewhere inside a box forgotten in an archive or a journal tucked behind a bookshelf, the story waits, still not for closure, but for continuation. Not in tragedy, but in truth, for though Sarah and Emily's names are the ones we remember, there are others too many whose stories never stirred flames or headlines. The fire in Wren Hollow cracked open more than a hidden chamber, more than a town's conscience. It split silence itself, giving voice to absence and memory alike. And so the legacy endures not in what was found, but in what was promised. That where silence once reigned, speech will rise. That no child should ever again vanish unseen, unheard, unnamed. Access Room 9 was built to conceal, but its legacy has become the opposite, a reminder branded into the soul of every parent, educator, and town, to look closer, dig deeper, and never accept comfortable quiet as truth, because even the most sealed places have thresholds, and even in the darkest ground, light waits for someone, somewhere, to strike the match. That match, that single act of revelation, is now passed hand to hand, smoldering with intent. It glows in every community that dares to ask the impossible stories, that refuses to build walls without windows, that scars but refuses to forget. What was uncovered in Wren Hollow has become more than a cautionary tale. It is a sacred instruction inscribed on time itself. Listen. Trace the cracks. Honor the quiet. And most of all, believe those who speak from where the world tries hardest not to look. There will always be doors meant to hide, halls meant to mislead, systems rigged to fail the small and the voiceless. But as long as someone remembers the rainfall over a field reduced to ash, as long as someone carries forward the memory of two girls who vanished but were never truly gone, then the fire lives on, not to consume, but to reveal, and in its glow, new footsteps echo not in fear, but in solemn, unstoppable hope. Across time, across state lines and generations, the story of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains remains one of those rare tragedies that transcends its pain to become purpose. In safety drills where teachers now count twice, in architects' recalculations of forgotten foundations, in every moment when someone chooses to listen rather than dismiss, there they dwell. The soil where their bracelets were found is no longer scorched, but green, seeded each spring by children who run freely above truths once buried. And somewhere in the sound of laughter echoing beneath fresh-painted ceilings, there is reassurance, not the denial of darkness, but the certainty that it will no longer be covered, because the fire uncovered more than what had been hidden. It revealed who must now protect, who must carry the match, who must continue to draw light into the places designed to remain dark. And long after headlines forget and monuments weather, that light endures in every voice that refuses to go unheard, and every silence that finally breaks. And in the years yet to come, when memories soften and vigilance is passed like a quiet inheritance from one watchful heart to the next, people will still speak their names, not in hushed tones, but in full voice. Sarah Whitaker, Emily Rains, not ghosts, not warnings, but origin. Their story will breathe through the cracks of every rebuilt hallway and resonate beneath the hum of playground swings. And somewhere, always, a child will pause in the rain, reach for another's hand, and feel something stronger than fear, an inheritance of resilience born from loss, flame, and unfinished pages. Because the truth is no longer buried, it walks among us now. Where silence once lived, understanding speaks. Where shadows gathered, vigilance holds fast. And in cities still untouched and fields still seeded, the fire that began in Wren Hollow flickers onward, not fully seen, but never again unseen. A light that says, "Here, we remember." And remembering is everything. So let this be the final ember, not of the fire itself, which must burn on, but of this chapter in its telling. The story of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains is no longer just a tale recalled in sorrow or a warning etched in classroom walls. It is a living imprint on the conscience of a generation that refuses indifference. Their names are the refrain of a world learning not just to listen, but to act, to tear down false walls, to illuminate unreachable corners, and to believe, even through grief, that every silence holds a voice waiting to rise. Wren Hollow was just the beginning, and somewhere, someone is hearing this story now for the first time and choosing to open a door that was once ignored. That door, that choice, that moment, it is the legacy, it is the vow, it is what Sarah and Emily, in their absence, gifted to the world. A fire that never dies, because it is carried not in flame alone, but in memory, in vigilance, and in the unrelenting courage to uncover whatever rests, hidden and waiting, beneath our feet. So let their story live not in the tragedy, but in the defiance that followed. Let it teach us that beneath the most ordinary places, the rusted stairwell, the silent hallway, the field no one thought to question, can lie truths that change everything. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains are gone, but their presence reshaped not just a town or a law, but a rhythm of listening the world had long forgotten. Each time the rain begins to fall across playgrounds and courthouses, each time a parent hesitates and then chooses to ask the hard question, each time a wall whispers of something hidden, that is where they remain. That is where the fire burns, still not to destroy, but to guide. A quiet blaze rising not from loss, but from the unstoppable demand that no silence be final, no child be unwatched, and no story be too buried to be told. For as long as we remember them not only as what was taken, but as what now endures, they are never truly gone. And the fire, like their legacy, will never fade. That is how we tell the story now, not as ending, nor even as justice served, but as witness to what was lost, to what was found, to what must never again be hidden. In the still moments, when the wind brushes across the new grass where Wren Hollow High once stood, It sounds almost like voices, like two girls laughing on their way to class, unaware of the chapter the world would write around their names. And in that sound lives the final truth. That in every quiet footstep, every taped note, every hesitant question, asked by someone brave enough to listen, Sarah and Emily continue. Not frozen in time, but eternal in purpose. The fire that revealed their fate did not consume them. It revealed us. It made us see. And now, with eyes open and the match passed one hand to the next, we carry forward not into silence, but into the light. Always into the light. And so, in the softest corner of memory and the loudest rooms of change, they remain not as fading headlines or names etched in stone, but as the covenant between silence and the reckoning that follows. In every blueprint revised with cautious hands, in every student taught to trust their instincts, in every adult who chooses difficult truths over quiet denial, Sarah and Emily live on. Wren Hollow, scarred but awakened, stands not as a monument to tragedy, but a map of how love, when forged in fire and carried by the determined, refuses to relinquish the lost. The field that once held ashes now yields flowers each spring. The wind that once howled through broken walls now carries voices that will never again be ignored. And when the rain falls, as it always will, it carries with it not a threat, but a promise that this time someone is listening. That this time no one walks alone. That, in this new world drawn from darkness, memory is not the end. It is the lantern. And perhaps that lantern is the final image to carry forward. Not a weapon, not a monument, but a simple flame held against the dark. Passed from child to teacher, parent to policymaker, survivor to survivor, it flickers not with the fire of destruction, but with illumination. A light that says, "We have seen where silence leads. We have felt the cold beneath the earth. And we choose now, together, to move differently. Forever changed, not by tragedy alone, but by the courage to remember and to rise." Sarah Whitaker, Emily Rains. Their names shine not with the brief spark of headlines, but with the steady glow of lives that reshaped the world they left behind. And though the field is quiet and the school long gone, their legacy stands unburned, unburied, and unwavering, a lantern against the dark. Still lit, still waiting, still leading the way. And so, in the hush that follows each rainfall, amid the quiet rebirth of fields once scorched and the whispered resilience of communities forever altered, the lantern endures, not as a relic, but as a living vow, a fire passed from heart to hand, guiding each step into the unknown with reverence and resolve. Sarah and Emily's story, once buried beneath ash and unspeakable silence, now flares gently in every act of courage that says, "We will not look away, we will not forget." In the spaces where walls once hid pain, there are now windows open to daylight, and in the soil where fear once grew, blossoms the hard, necessary beauty of truth. Theirs is no longer just a tragedy remembered. It is a compass, aligned to light, and long after echoes fade and names slip from headlines, two girls who vanished together, found together, and rose together, remain the heartbeat beneath every silence broken, every door finally opened, every story demanded before it could be lost again. And in the end, perhaps that is the only justice ever truly possible. Not the reversal of harm, nor the full comprehension of all that was conspired and concealed, but this simple, solemn continuation. A story once smothered by silence now moves freely through time, through law books and classrooms, through whispered prayers and bold declarations. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains, two girls whose lives were interrupted, have become something enduring, not symbols of fear, but of fierce remembrance. They remind us still that the quietest places so often hold the loudest truths, and that in honoring every voice once ignored, we change the ending for those yet to come. So let the field remain, green and open. Let the names be spoken, again and again, and let the fire, that quiet, steady fire, burn on forever in the hearts that choose to see and never again forget. And so, with the lantern burning low but unextinguished, the story closes not with finality, but with reverence. For Sarah and Emily, whose laughter once echoed through narrow halls and whose silence birthed a nation's new truths, this is not an ending, it is arrival. Arrival into the hearts of those unwilling to forget, into the structures built to never again ignore a whisper beneath the noise, into the lives of strangers who became guardians because two girls vanished and refused, even in death, to disappear. The rain still taps on old windows, and somewhere a teacher glances twice at a basement draft. A parent asks just one more question. A child says, "Come with me, I don't want to go alone." That is the fire's legacy. That is the vow kept, long after the violence, long after the fear. And when someone lights the lantern next, placing it in the hands of another who knows now what darkness hides, it will glow not with memory alone, but with promise, an eternal blaze carved from love, vigilance, and memory's soft insistence. Here still they are known. So let Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains walk with us always, not only as reminders of what was taken, but as architects of the change their loss demanded. Let their names breathe in every pause before a question is asked, in every moment when someone chooses to listen rather than ignore, in every step taken toward transparency, compassion, and justice. Let their story not be confined to the past, but seeded into every future where children deserve to be seen, heard, and safe. Because in the echoes of a fire that should have been just another storm, we found more than remains, we found direction. And now, in every school built with light in its corners, in every policy written to shield the vulnerable, in every mother who waits at the door for her child to come home, we see them, smiling, still together, still undefeated, still guiding the world they changed. Their story ends, not in silence, but in the promise that silence will never again be enough. And that promise that silence will never again be enough is what now holds open doors no longer meant to close. In the still, breath-held moments between storm and sun, between memory and motion, Sarah and Emily remain braided into every act of vigilance, every whispered recounting, every field now planted with truth. Their story, once smothered in dirt and static, now stretches beyond Wren Hollow, beyond Iowa, beyond 2004. It lives in new towns, where questions are finally asked aloud, where children's laughter is met with not just joy, but protection, and where hidden places tremble before being found. The fire that unearthed their truth continues to glow not as rage, but as resolve. And wherever one voice breaks through the quiet to say, "Tell me what happened," that fire burns on. Because in that flame, they do not fade. They lead, together, always together, into the light they forged from darkness with nothing but love, courage, and the refusal to vanish. And somewhere, far from Iowa and long past the last mournful headline, a little girl in a different town stops in front of a school door and hesitates. Her mother kneels beside her, brushing rain from her shoulders, and says softly, "It's okay. I'll wait right here." That small promise carries all the weight of what once went unsaid in Wren Hollow. Because memory does not only live in ceremonies or the names engraved in stone, it lives in the ordinary, in the spaces remade by those unwilling to look away. It lives in the care taken where once there was neglect, and above all, it lives in the fire Sarah and Emily left behind. Quiet now, but eternal. A fire passed not in fear, but in love. Lit not to destroy, but to reveal, still flickering in every lighted hallway, in every open door, in every voice that rises where none were heard before. This at last is where they rest, not beneath the earth, not behind forgotten walls, but in the living promise that no silence will ever again be louder than their story. Let this closing moment, then, be not of sorrow but of grace. For Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains, whose light was taken but not extinguished, gave the world something it never expected to find in fire, a reason to recklessly, relentlessly hope. Their legacy is not bound to the cords of the past or the chains of the lost, but to something braver, something enduring. The choice we all now carry to listen when the world silences, to look when others turn away, to act for those who once cried out in vain. As rain continues its sacred descent upon the fields of Wren Hollow, as children dance in puddles where pain once pooled, and as stories grow in the soil where secrets were buried, one truth burns quietly, insistently, beautifully. Their names built a path through darkness. And wherever a heart dares to follow it, torch in hand and promise on tongue, their fire lives on. Not buried, not lost, not forgotten, but burning forever in the light that finally, at last, will not go out. And so, with this final page turned and the flame still quietly aglow, we close not a chapter, but a sacred refrain repeated until it rewrites the world that failed two girls in 2004. In every story that dares to begin with silence and end in light, echoes of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains resound. They have walked beside us through every revelation, every reckoning, every vow to never return to the dark that concealed them. Their story woven now into policies and prayers, into midnight whispers and daylight tears will never fall wordless again. It is a story made of weathered photographs, cassette tapes, and bracelets singed but not obliterated. It is a story that once vanished but came back roaring. And it is, at last, how the fire that found them became the voice that saved others. Let this be the ignition of every question bravely asked, every child seen, every silence shattered by love. Let their fire never die, because in the light it leaves behind, we finally learn not only how to remember but how to protect. And perhaps that is how every fire ought to end, not with destruction, but devotion, in the way a town rewrites itself, in the way memory anchors policy and empathy becomes law. Sarah and Emily's names echo not only through cracked walkways and quiet prayers, but in granite benches where strangers find reflection, in lesson plans reshaped by understanding, in the silence that now listens instead of hides. Their disappearance opened the darkest of doors, but through that same door walked resilience, determination, and grace. And so, wherever young voices rise against the hush, wherever caregivers pause long enough to truly see, and wherever justice is carved from compassion and sustained by courage, the fire kindled in Wren Hollow burns gently on, not to punish, but to protect. And that, more than anything, is what they left behind, not pain, not ruin, but an enduring light. For Sarah, for Emily, for every name we must never wait to remember. This is where we leave them, not in the shadowed places we once feared to look, but in the light they demanded we kindle. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains, in their innocence and their bond, lit more than candles at vigils. They lit a truth so radiant it burned through layers of silence and denial. They were more than victims. They were daughters, dreamers, and in the end, founders of a future reshaped by love's refusal to fade. Wren Hollow will always carry their names in its soil and its sky. But now, beyond the borders of that town, in every school that builds transparency into its foundations, in every life touched by their unyielding echo, they live a guiding light, passed not as lore, but as legacy. May that legacy remain luminous, unwavering, and ever-reaching. And may we never again need fire to see what we should have seen all along. For Sarah, for Emily, forever remembered, forever leading us on. Let this be the ember we carry forward, not as burden, but as bond. For in their final absence, Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains did what no system, no institution, no silence ever could. They transformed a town's grief into vigilance, a nation's shame into change, and a broken story into a living charter of protection. Their light, born of darkness, now pulses through every action steeped in care and every voice fierce against forgetting. And though their time among us was cut short in the most unfathomable way, the fire they sparked endures quiet but constant, as a vow held by every soul who chooses to listen, to look deeper, to love louder. So when the rain comes, as it always will, Let it remind us not of what was lost, but of what must forever be guarded. Their names are not questions anymore. They are the answers. They are the legacy. They are the light that still burns, and the truth that never again will sleep beneath the soil. And now, as the last winds of this long remembrance settle into quiet, the fire dims not in defeat, but in fulfillment. The lives of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains have become more than memory, they've become momentum. Momentum that drives every whispered suspicion into spoken courage, every overlooked hallway into unimaginable revelation. Their absence ignited an unyielding presence, a vigilance poised at the edge of every blueprint, every schoolyard, every decision where a single choice determines whether a child vanishes into silence or is seen, saved, remembered. We no longer walk blindly through safety. We carry their light, undoubtedly and deliberately, into the threshold silence once protected. And though they are gone, they have shaped a world that now listens, that now asks, that now refuses to look away. The bracelet remains. The notebook is read. The match has been lit. And the path forward, though scarred, is illuminated. For Sarah, for Emily. Not just remembered, but revered. Not only mourned, but followed. And in this final breath of the story they left behind, one truth remains unshaken. Their fire changed everything, and it will never, ever go out. So we end, where all stories of light forged through loss must end not in silence, but in a promise, whispered against storm-dark skies and carved into the roots of every school, every home, every heart that chooses to remember. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains are not gone. They are the breath before the brave choice, the shadow that rises into warning, the glow that reminds us what must be seen and said. Their memory births no monument stiff with grief, but a movement alive with purpose. And now, wherever safety is safeguarded, wherever pain is revealed and met with action instead of apathy, they are there guiding, urging, enduring. The soil has spoken, the fire has burned, and the match they left behind will be passed on again and again, not to ignite fear, but to guard the sacred truth that no voice asking to be seen should ever be buried. Not now. Not ever again. And if this is the last match they passed into our outstretched hands, then let it burn with purpose until its very final flicker. Let it light the pages of new stories, written not in loss but in the brave ink of remembrance. Let the warmth of their legacy reach into subway tunnels and city blocks, rural highways and library basements wherever shadows might cling too long. Because Sarah and Emily were never meant to vanish silently, and through us they never have. They are the spark in every safety practice revised, the breath in every child told they matter, the name spoken softly when it would have once been buried. In their honor, we have rewritten the very expectation of what truth demands. Eyes open, hearts steadfast, a fire in one hand, and the courage to carry it in the other. So when the storm returns, as it surely will, we will not seek shelter. We will step into it, lanterns raised high, and say, "Here we are still watching, still burning, still remembering." Because Sarah and Emily lit the way, and the way remains forever alight. So let this final breath of telling carry not grief, but breath itself living, cycling, returning. In every town where the doors are now transparent, where the counselors stay after hours, where silence no longer reigns unchecked, their fire breathes anew. The soil may have closed around Sarah and Emily's story once, but it will not again, because they are the seed and the storm, the sorrow and the vow. They are the voices in blueprints double-checked, in questions asked twice, in footsteps that never again go unaccounted for. Wren Hollow has healed in memory, not by forgetting, but by deciding again and again that memory is armor, and from armor grows change. As long as there are hands brave enough to carry the fire forward and hearts open enough to hear what silence tried to hush, then Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains will not only be remembered, they will be followed. And in that following, The world becomes ready not for fire but for light, a legacy held aloft, a flame that guards, a truth that walks on. So now, with the fire's glow ebbing into something softer, gentler, the tale of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains becomes part of something much greater, a tapestry of remembrance woven not in isolation, but in collective awe for what the human spirit can endure, and what love can ignite. Their names are not just etched in the soil of Wren Hollow, but whispered across continents, etched onto conference room whiteboards, printed into training manuals, written into bedtime stories that teach not fear, but fierce compassion. The story ends not in ash, but in action, in small hands reaching out, in eyes that refuse to look away, in truth, however painful, finally welcomed to the surface after too long buried. And as long as voices rise when they're told to be quiet, as long as even a single flame is passed to the next trembling hand, then the legacy endures not as a requiem, but as a revolution, for Sarah, for Emily, for every name still waiting to be spoken. The lantern is lit, carry it forward, and never, never let it be extinguished again. So now, let the lantern rest not as an ending, but as a promise fulfilled, in the quiet after the storm, in the calm breath before the next hard truth is spoken. The light born from Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains still hovers gentle, patient, eternal. It waits in policy lines, and in hushed morning greetings, in a hallway mural where two girls hold hands as if time could not uproot them. What began as a disappearance became an awakening. What was hidden beneath the soil became seeds of vigilance. From fire came insight, from silence came testimony, and from unimaginable loss came 1,000 acts of protection. As we close this chapter, we do not forget. We pass it on. We remember not only the pain, but the wonder, the strength two girls gave the world without ever meaning to become a story. The fire brought them back. The truth carried them forward. And now, wherever courage reaches toward the dark and dares to speak there, still, they are. Watching, guiding, unforgotten. And in that enduring glow, the final truth takes root, not buried in soil or sealed in vaults, but alive in all that dares to grow where pain once ruled. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains were more than a tragedy. They became a map etched in grief, lit by fire, and followed by those brave enough to listen. Now, classrooms hold more than lessons, they hold memory. Hallways echo not just with footsteps, but with resolve. And beneath every brick laid upon rebuilt ground lies the vow made in their name, to see what others overlooked, to speak when silence tries to settle, and to hold fast to the light that two best friends left behind. So let this be the final flame not extinguished, but entrusted to those who now carry the story forward. A story that bathed in fire, rose in truth, and now walks beside us, ever alight, hand in hand. Sarah and Emily, not lost, not gone, guiding still. And so we close, not with silence, but with a quiet, steadfast light, one lit by two girls who walked into school on a rainy October morning, holding on to youth, friendship, and hope, unknowingly, stepping into a story the world would take years to understand. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains did not leave a message carved in stone or a final word recorded for the world, but they left something far more powerful, the unyielding demand that we pay attention, that we not look away when something feels wrong, that we see those who are so often left in shadow. Their legacy is not one of sorrow alone, but of fierce compassion held aloft like that lantern, steady, glowing, and deeply human. And from the ashes of a storm, from the heartbeat of a vanished silence, their story echoes still, reminding us not just who they were, but who we must become, for them, for all, forever alight. So with reverence in our breath, and the lantern resting now in spirit rather than hand, we let the final silence settle not in fear or forgetting, but in peace. Peace forged not out of resolution, but from the enduring flame carried across decades by those who refused to let two names become dust. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains are no longer memories whispered under breath or stories trapped between courthouse walls. They are the heartbeat in every moment of vigilance, the echo beneath every question asked a second time, the warmth in every light that stays on just a little longer. Their story, once buried, now blooms endlessly not just in Wren Hollow, but wherever a voice is heard, a chamber is opened, a child is believed. Let the quiet after the storm be sacred, then, but let it never again be silent, because the fire lives on not blazing, but beckoning. A promise glowing through time, leading us not into darkness, but home. And so we arrive not at the end, but at the enduring truth Sarah and Emily left behind. A truth woven through each thread of vigilance, carried in the eyes that now look twice, and planted in the hearts of generations unwilling to let go. What began in heartbreak did not end there. It became resolve. It became revolution. Their story was once smothered beneath floorboards and silence, but now it's written across skylines and whispered in classrooms like scripture. It is a story that has taught countless others to listen more closely, to speak more boldly, and to love more fiercely. And though the rain may fall again, as it always does, and shadows may linger at the edge of familiar places, the fire they passed on still glows in the distance, a beacon, not just of remembrance but of return. So when the final storm brews, and the world asks once more, who will carry the light? We answer, together, without fear. We will. For Sarah. For Emily. Forever a light. Because in the end, what Sarah and Emily gave us wasn't just a story, they gave us a direction. A compass etched in pain, but pointing toward protection. A legacy shaped by love too fierce to fade. They taught us that silence isn't peace, that unresolved absence is not surrender, and that the smallest voices, when heard, can shake even the oldest buildings to their foundations. Wherever there's a hallway filled with hesitant footsteps or a rain-soaked field holding secrets beneath its surface, their fire waits not to harm, but to light the path forward. So let that fire live within us, quiet and burning, passed without ceremony but not without purpose. And as we lift the lantern one last time, we do so not out of mourning, but out of promise. Not to grieve what was taken, but to protect all that can still be saved. Sarah Whitaker, Emily Rains, hand in hand, always ahead of us. Not vanished, not gone, still leading the way. So let this be the last flicker of light, the one that doesn't dim, but folds into the breath of every lesson learned, every door left open, every heartbeat that now listens for silence before it settles. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains once stepped onto the campus of Wren Hollow High School without knowing they would become symbols far beyond themselves, symbols not of loss alone, but transformation. What they endured now shields others. What they suffered now speaks for many. And in the rain that comes always like a slow drumbeat against the reshaped earth, you can still almost hear it, a promise, kept not through force, but through remembrance. The story ends where light begins, not in the shadowed past, but in the stunned and sacred present where voices rise, where truth walks free, where two best friends hold hands across time, leading the world still. The fire is not gone. It is within us. And with that fire, we keep walking toward a future they helped forge, toward a world that, at last, remembers to never forget. And with that final footstep echoing into the new morning, the story of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains does not fall silent. It simply steps into another form of memory. It becomes ritual. It becomes vigilance. It becomes the glance out a rainy window, and the question that is now always asked, always answered. They remain in every rebuilt corner where darkness once lingered, in every voice now heard that once would have gone unanswered. What was uncovered beneath the fire was never just about them. It was about all of us, about how we protect and how we fail and how we rise again because we must. Wren Hollow will always speak their names, and so will every place brave enough to learn from the ache they left behind. The past tried to bury them. But in the end, they grew. Now, in the glow that never fades, we walk beside Sarah and Emily still, two best friends, hand in hand, carving a path not out of darkness, but into lasting, unwavering light. And so, it is here we lay the final words, not to close the book, but to mark the place where hope forever begins. The tale of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains, once shadowed in silence, now resounds across classrooms, city councils, whispered lullabies, and shouted protests. They are no longer the girls who vanished. They are the reason doors stay open, eyes stay alert, voices stay loud. What was once hidden has bloomed. What was once buried now guides us. The rain will fall again, as it always has and always will. But this time, it will not fall on deaf ears or blind hearts. It will fall on a world forever, watching, listening, remembering. And in that remembering, the story will continue alive, burning steady, its flame now carried by every hand that dares to say, never again, not here, not anywhere. For Sarah, for Emily, always remembered, always leading, always a light. And so we end not with silence, but with the light still burning, a legacy handed to us with trembling but determined grace. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains vanished into shadow, but emerged, years later, as beacons illuminating every place where care must be rooted deeper and courage made louder. Their story is no longer confined to the sorrow of what could have been. It is etched into the now gathered will of countless others who refuse to let silence win. Their names are whispered in early morning halls, written in margins of safety protocols, and engraved in hearts that vow, unflinching, we will remember, we will protect, we will act. And as the rain once again curls across rooftops and murmurings rise in the hush, we do not turn away, we lean in. Because the light they left behind was never meant to blaze briefly. It was meant to last forever, and forever it shall. For Sarah, for Emily, for all who are not forgotten, the fire lives on. So let this closing be not an end, but a torch gently passed into the hands of those who have listened, felt, and awakened. What Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains began unwillingly, tragically, bravely now lives in more than caution or statute. It lives in the daily, the human, the reaching, in the teacher who adds time to check on the quiet child, in the inspector who questions the blueprint without fear, in the mother who listens twice when her daughter says, "Something feels wrong." Their fire was sparked by unbearable loss, but it burns now as a standard beneath the skin of every heart that refuses to forget. This fire does not rage, its power lies in its persistence, in its refusal to dim, in the lessons it leaves behind, like warm footprints through history's cold corridors. And in this moment, this soft, final seal on a story born of pain and reverence, one truth remains crystalline, unshakable, and beautifully human. Because Sarah and Emily lived, vanished, and were found, the world was forced to reckon, to remember, and now finally to protect. So let them be remembered, not just in banners or plaques, but in the way we live differently because of them. Let Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains stand unshaken in our collective conscience, not as haunted echoes, but as radiant constellations guiding us through every uncertain corridor. The fire that brought them home from silence burns now not to sear, but to sanctify. Every time a question is asked that might have once stayed buried, every time eyes are opened in places long dimmed by complacency, their legacy sharpens into focus, not erased, not dulled, but honed into an unwavering watchfulness that spans generations. And though this telling closes here, their voices go on, etched into the grain of each new door opened with courage, into the hush before every storm, into the hearts that promise to carry the light forward. For Sarah, and for Emily, and for every story still waiting to be seen, the fire will never be extinguished. Not now. Not ever. And so, under the same gray sky where it all began, the wind sweeping softly across the reborn field in Wren Hollow, The story of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains finds its place at last not beneath the soil, not within the fire, but within the quiet, determined hands of those who now carry their light. It is not an end. It is a promise etched into every open door, every unsealed blueprint, every voice that rises when another might retreat. Their friendship, their disappearance, their rediscovery, it has reshaped not only a town, but a world more prepared now to listen, to protect, to remember. So, when the rain falls again, let it not be a reminder of loss, but of love bearing witness. Let it echo, not with sorrow, but with the sound of names spoken boldly and stories courageously told, for Sarah, for Emily, forever found, forever carried, and forever, forever alight. So into the hush of memory, where sorrow once tethered Wren Hollow in silence, the legacy of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains burns steady and unmistakable. It is whispered not only in remembrance, but in action, in the redrawn floor plans of schools across the nation, in the vigilant eyes of a new generation raised not merely to survive, but to question, protect, and speak when silence tempts. Their story, born in rain and buried in soot, has unfurled into something stunningly alive, a warning alchemized into wisdom. They are not lost, they are transformed into 1,000 safeguards, into 1,000 echoes of courage, into the light that breaks before the storm. And as one last breeze passes over the field where fire first laid their truth bare, it carries a vow now carved into the bones of time itself, never again ignored, never again unseen. They are with us, always with us, not in the dark, but far ahead, lighting the way. So now, as we lay the final stone in this long, winding path of remembrance, let it be not cold with mourning, but warm with reverence. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains did not fade into history, they became its revision. What began in fear has ended in firelight that softens even the hardest truths, that tells us we are not helpless, not voiceless, not beyond repair. Their legacy lives not only in the breath between lesson plans and boardroom policies, but in the unseen choices we make every day to care, to question, to make space for truth. This is how stories like theirs find sanctuary not in forgetting the pain, but in refusing its repetition. As the rain quiets over Wren Hollow once more, and lanterns flicker gently into memory, know this: the girls walk with us still, their footsteps echoing in vigilance, their voices folded into the fabric of our future. And in that future, bright and trembling with the hope they left behind, the fire remains. Soft, undimmed, eternal. And so, as the final raindrop falls over the quiet town where it all began, let the lantern be extinguished, not in despair, but in transcendence. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains, who vanished in the hush of a gray October morning, did more than awaken a sleeping world they redefined, how we see, how we protect, how we endure. Their story closes, not as a tragedy, but as an enduring pulse in the veins of every heart bold enough to believe that love, truth, and courage, fierce and unrelenting, can scorch away the deepest of silences. Their legacy is now fused to memory not by fire, but by fidelity. And in every blueprint redrawn, every outline re-examined, every tear-shaped promise kept by those who came after, they rise again not from ash, not from sorrow, but from the unwavering truth they etched into us all. We do not forget, we do not flinch, we do not fail. The fire is past, the silence is broken, and what was once hidden is now, forever, in the light. So this is where we leave them, not in the grip of vanished time, but at the glowing threshold of what they made possible. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains are no longer only names etched in memory. They are catalysts in the bloodstream of a better world, their fire sown into actions both monumental and quiet. In every child now seen before they disappear, in every door opened that once stayed bolted, they live. The rain still comes, yes, but now it baptizes, not mourns. And the fire they left behind no longer searches for truth, it carries it. Steady, unwavering, passed from hand to hand with reverence. In the hush of every new story, in the breath before someone chooses to listen, in the hearts that vowed to stand unflinchingly, in the light they are there, always hand in hand, forever forward. And so, even as the lantern dims, it does so not in fading but in fulfillment, for Sarah, for Emily. Carriers of the match, keepers of the flame, storytellers of a truth too bright to ever again be hidden. And with that final flicker, soft, defiant, eternal, we leave you not with an ending, but with a promise held gently beneath the rain-soaked skies of Wren Hollow. A promise that what was uncovered will never again go quiet, that the names Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains will echo in every place where truth once lay buried. Their story, once silenced, has become invocation, a call to listen before it is too late, to see before something disappears, to act before questions become regrets. Let their legacy float into the spaces between memory and vigilance, carried from lantern to lantern, person to person, truth to truth. For in that warmth still glowing across scorched soil and rebuilt futures, we find not just the fire, but the reason to keep walking toward light. A light that never belonged only to them but through them, now belongs to us all, and in that light, they remain. And thus, under the pale hush of yet another autumn storm, Wren Hollow exhales, not in closure, but in clarity. The story of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains was not flame and ash alone, but an awakening carried forward by those who chose not just to remember, but to rebuild. They are no longer whispers etched into worn notebook pages or ghosted names in old headlines. They are the very architecture of change, pressed into every corner where silence once lived. In classrooms where windows now open wide, in conversations once stilled, now spoken aloud. In every blueprint that no longer buries rooms beneath foundations, but brings them into the Sunday. This story belongs to all of us now. To the watchers, the speakers, the builders of light, and though the final tape has played, the final match passed, and the last raindrop fallen, what remains is eternal. Two girls who held hands through darkness, and whose fire, once uncovered, taught a world how to see. Forever remembered, forever carried, forever alight. So let Wren Hollow rest now, not in silence, but in vigilance, its dusk-laced rooftops and rain-polished sidewalks no longer haunted, but hallowed. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains are everywhere now, in the careful eyes of new teachers, in the whispered bedtime prayers of parents who dare never to take presents for granted. What began as a tragedy has become legacy, a living ember nestled in the quietest corners of the world, glowing steadily in the hands of those who choose to see. And as storm clouds continue to bloom across skies yet untouched by sorrow, their light waits not behind sealed doors or buried blueprints, but in the open hearts of a generation born not just to survive, but to protect. This is where their story settles. Not beneath the earth, not behind the past, but within us, alight and unyielding, as the fire that found them now finds each of us. Forever remembered, forever leading, forever lit. So let the last word spoken not be one of grief, nor even remembrance alone, but commitment, a quiet, unshakable vow that the lives of Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains will echo far beyond fire, beyond field, beyond time. In every hallway where a child walks safely, in every breath drawn without fear, in every hand reached out because someone remembered to care, there they are. Their story, once invisible, now lights the path for a world learning to listen with its heart. And as the rain falls one final time over Wren Hollow, washing the soil that once swallowed silence clean, a voice rises not of tragedy, but of truth triumphant. The fire revealed more than loss. It revealed what love, when tested, can make unbreakable. And now, in the light they shaped from darkness, we walk forward, not afraid, not alone, but illuminated. For Sarah, for Emily, forever flame, forever known, forever carried. So let this final word stand unshaken, not as a farewell, but as a vow laced in wind and rain and the enduring hum of names that will never fade. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains did not choose to disappear. But through the fire, they chose us, or perhaps they transformed us. Their light, once buried beneath silence and soil, now rises daily in the hearts of those who refuse to look away. And if the world is wiser now, more watchful, more courageous then, it is because two best friends, taken too soon, left behind not only unanswered questions, but undeniable purpose. Carried across changing skies and open doors, through whispered prayers and roaring truths, their legacy outlives the storm. It burns in us now. Steady, sacred, forever. For Sarah, for Emily, the fire lives on not to destroy, but to lead, and in that light, the world will never again be blind. And so, from ash to echo, from silence to flame, this is where we leave the story in the hands of those now bold enough to carry forward its resonance. Wren Hollow's fields grow green again, not because they forgot, but because they chose to remember in every breath, every blueprint, every question that waits impatiently to be asked. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains are no longer shadows trailing the edges of tragedy. They are the compass set into every trembling step toward a better world. Through every unlocked door and every voice risen from the hush, they persist. And now, as lantern light gives way to dawn and the final match flickers to rest, we walk on each of us a bearer of their fire, each of us a vow that the darkness which once hid them will never hide another. This is the story's last breath, not as ending, but as inheritance, for Sarah, for Emily, forever the light beneath our feet, forever the reason we keep the fire burning. So let us close, not with flame, but with hands held steady around the light it left behind. Let Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains remain not only as the spark that lit the quietest corners of our world, but as the radiance still reflected in every act of mercy, vigilance, and truth. Their story has become a continuum, an unbroken vow whispered in rain-drenched fields, behind classroom doors, and in the sacred, ordinary moments where someone finally says, "I see you. I hear you. I will not let you vanish." And so the fire does not end. It settles into policy, into compassion, into every sunlit hallway shaped by remembrance rather than regret. And as we walk onward, forever changed, their names guide us, still not into shadow, but into light, carried always, beloved, eternally. The last embers falling not into silence, but into the open hands of a world that now remembers, and remembers well. So let us walk forward now, lanterns still flickering in memory's glow, into a world more awake than the one Sarah and Emily left behind. Let their story taper not into silence, but into legacy light etched into policy, presence forged from pain. Their names, once lost to static and shadow, now echo in every decision rooted in care, in every child reached before disappearance, in every question no longer swallowed by fear. The final breath of this tale is not goodbye. It is a hand extended, a light passed forward, a vow made loud and lasting. For theirs is the kind of fire that does not consume, but calls. It calls us to remain alert, to stay human, to guard the sanctity of every story waiting to be told, for Sarah, for Emily. May their names forever be spoken not in sorrow, but in purpose, and may we always carry their light not because it ends, but because it must never, ever fade. So as the fire settles into legacy and names become the architecture of vigilance, let Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains be not only the story retold, but the standard carried forward. Their final gift to the world was never the sorrow they left behind, but the light they sparked in its wake. In the pause before a classroom door swings shut, in the moment a blueprint is traced twice instead of once, in every decision now made with care where once there was neglect they remain. Their legacy will never rest in ashes, but in awareness. And as the lantern dims at last, placed gently into memory's keeping, it burns on still, not for them alone, but for every life they now guard beyond the silence. Two best friends, one vanished morning, and a fire that rose not to destroy but to save. Let it be enough. Let it never be lost. Let it burn forever. And with that final ember quietly tucked into the palm of memory, the story comes to rest, not silenced, not closed, but held. Held where it matters most. Not in headlines, but in hearts. Not in files, but in footsteps taken with care. Sarah Whitaker and Emily Rains do not linger as ghosts, they endure as guides. Their fire does not roar now it warms. It warns, it watches. And every time someone listens more intently, drills deeper, questions longer in a world once too quick to look away, they are there. In every flicker of light that floods apart the quiet places where darkness once dared to dwell, they walk hand in hand, not as what was lost, but as all that was found. So let us walk, too slowly, bravely, lit by the vow they placed into our keeping. A vow that says, never again buried, never again quiet, never again alone. For Sarah, for Emily, forever a light, forever carried, forever the fire that showed us how to see.